I can see the ball spot. Very close. Yep, everything's ready. I think if you can give it a few more minutes. Where's my bag? Yeah, but I got something. Not right now. Yo, you too. You want something from Roasters? You want something from Roasters? No, no, there's no compensation. It's just our external volunteers. This is part of your contract. Bismillah. Roaches. Bismillah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والسماء واليوم الموعود وشاهد ومشهود قتل أصحاب الأخدود النار ذات إذ هم عليها قعود وهم على ما يفعلون بالمؤمنين وما نقموا منهم إلا العزيز الحكيم الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء شهيد إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات إن الذين وعملوا الصالحات
by the sky full of constellations, and the promised day of judgment, and the witness and what is witnessed. Condemned are the makers of the ditch, the fire pit filled with fuel, when they sat around it, watching what they had ordered to be done to the believers, who they resented for no reason other than belief in Allah, the Almighty, the Praiseworthy, the one to whom belongs the kingdom of the heavens and earth, and Allah is a witness over all things. Those who persecute the believing men and women, and then do not repent, will certainly suffer the punishment of hell and the torment of burning. Surely those who believe and do good will have gardens under which rivers flow. That is the greatest triumph.
In today's conversation, I acknowledge the territory of the Algonquin, who have lived and cared for this land for a millennia, as an organization that's dedicated to advocating for persecuted Muslim community, sovereignty, and colonialism's ongoing impact. The acknowledgement is a crucial step towards our commitment to justice, solidarity, and peaceful. Starting with the Indigenous community of Canada, which we are supporting for travel under our I would like to begin just kind of sharing a little bit about Justice for All Canada and what we do. We are a human rights advocacy organization with a consultative United Nations. We advocate for persecuted religious including other religious and ethnic minorities that are facing oppression. Our work essentially aims to challenge state-level Islamophobia, discrimination, genocide, and violence on social media. Where our United States counterpart, Justice for All, was instrumental in not only stopping the genocide, but establishing the recognition of rape as a war crime. So we advocate for prevention besides the however, I want to so we have our state order coming into the so we advocate for the
I hope everyone can hear me. The mic is working. I don't want to give a long monologue, so I'll just give you a little bit about tell you a little bit about how I started my activism for our community. So as mentioned, I was born in Uzbekistan, but I left my homeland when I was very young. I was only 8 years old. And our family were never really into activism. My parents would teach me about our culture and the importance of our people, but we were never actively involved. We're quite busy trying to survive as newly come immigrants in Canada. So the way I started my activism was, prior to that, in 2016, for my 18th birthday, my parents kind of give me a gift and said, you know what, we'll let you go back and visit family. And so I did. I went back to Uzbekistan when I was 18 in 2016. And mind you, the concentration camps, we know that the concentration camps were being built in 2014, starting in 2014. So obviously we didn't know this was happening. So without knowledge of any of that, I went back to visit my family. And when I left the airport, it never really felt like I left the airport because there was security everywhere. But as someone who wasn't really in activism and didn't really know what was happening, I said, oh, okay, this is strange, but I kind of just left it in the back of my mind. And we can, I can tell you about the details of my visit if you want later. But so I saw, tight security. There weren't as much people as I remembered in my city, and just strange occurrences that I didn't think too much about at the time. And in 2017, that was really when they started rounding up a lot of people and putting them in concentration camps. And my mother decided to go back to Uzbekistan to visit her father, who was very old and ill. So again, we didn't know that, we didn't know about the camps. We didn't really know about the severity of depression that was happening. And she was only able to get a 1-week visa. And after 5 days, she came back. And, she saw even more than I did. Obviously, similarly, she saw the tight security, metal detecting doors everywhere, police everywhere. But she would also hear something that I didn't hear, which was so-and-so disappeared. So she would hear stories of maybe a friend or maybe a colleague or maybe, just random people, neighbors, whoever. People would say so-and-so disappeared for really, ridiculous reasons, like, I don't know, they have a passport, so they got taken, or they visited Turkey in 1990 something, and that's why they got detained. So after she came back, she was telling me about her experience, and then we exchanged a little bit about what I saw as well. But again, at the time, we're still struggling to understand what was happening, because when my mom asked the people there, where were these people being taken, they don't know, because the information is so tightly controlled in China and even within Uzbekistan and within neighborhoods, that they don't know what's happening to each other. So I believe it was in 2018, 2019, that's when really, reports about the camps and news articles and a lot of talk about the concentration camps started to emerge. And that's when we had, put the puzzle together and we said, okay, so this is what we saw. This is, a part of what we saw. And that's when we really decided to actively advocate for people. And that's when we said, you know what, we can't just, we've seen those with our own eyes. We can't just sit still and not do anything. So that's why it's so important for our community as well as for youth to advocate for the Uyghur cause, because we're talking about a genocide happening in the 21st century, right? And when people think about genocide, they just think about war and mass killing, but it's not always the case. This genocide is very systemic. It's government-sponsored. It uses technology such as facial recognition cameras and phone apps and all kinds of digital tech to suppress our people and genocide our people. So it's so important for us to get involved because not only does this affect the Uyghur community, but it also affects our own community in Canada. For example, if I talk about forced labor, this affects our supply chain in Canada and what you are wearing, maybe the laptop you're using, the car you're driving. We're talking about green energy, the solar panels, they're made in Uzbekistan with forced labor. So this isn't just this is an issue in some faraway land that, we may or may not care about. This is really affecting us directly. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. So assalamualaikum everybody. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And it's an honor to share the stage with CUMSA. I'm sure you guys have heard she's been doing amazing work in the community, within the government and in general. So she's been an amazing mentor to me as an individual. So it's an honor to share the stage with her. I'll tell you guys a bit about my work currently and a bit more about the Uyghur genocide. I was born and raised in Canada, so I don't have that experience that CUMSA does back home. I visited a couple of times as a kid before 2016, before the concentration camps. And excuse my voice, I'm a little sick today, so it's gonna come out a little iffy, but it's okay. So in East Turkestan is a predominantly Muslim ethnic group. Uyghurs have been around for centuries. They have a very, very deep culture, very interesting and long history, and a beautiful heritage. If you guys can take a look at the items we brought, there is so much culture and tradition behind the Uyghurs, and there's so much beautiful history that is slowly and systematically being wiped out. Uyghurs or East Turkestan, which is now known as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, was occupied by China in 1940 and 1949. And since then, there has been levels of oppression going on. And it hasn't been as bad as it has in 2016 until up to now. In 1948, we were occupied by CCP, and now in 2016, we had the concentration camps. And there has been atrocities that is hard to even mention, let alone think about happening to your own siblings, your cousins, your aunts and uncles, your grandparents. Atrocities that is hard to imagine, and yet it's happening in this exact moment on the other side of the earth, right? To our people, not just as Muslims, not just Uyghurs, but as humans. It's happening to humans. And so this issue has been definitely very, very personal to me, and everything really about me, my career, my studies, my personal projects, everything I've been doing has been related to this cause in some way. And I think, like Kelsar said, it is our responsibility as human beings to fight for this cause. So as Ganyet mentioned before, I am working on a blockchain application to fight forced labor that is coming out of East Turkestan. However, it's not something that's easily done, right? It's really based on us. Are we gonna buy that Shein product? Are we gonna go support the companies that have been actively supporting forced labor, right? And it's really up to us. And I think that's something that's really important, is that silence is complicity in this world. And many of us are very, very silent. We don't even take the first step to hear about what's really happening. We trust whatever we see on social media. We trust whatever our neighbor is saying or whatever this government is saying. We don't really do our own research. We don't try to look beneath the BS that we see all over, right? And so silence is complicity, and really, really, we need to do our work in finding out the truth.
I'll start with Kelsar. You talked a little bit about how you got a chance to go back And you guys have the display here of Uyghur culture, and I think if you could speak to some of the ways you think Uyghur culture, language, and tradition has been suppressed, and what are the most significant threats to Uyghur cultural heritage under the current state policies, and how this impacts individuals as well as divided entities. Yes, so as Asma mentioned, our oppression is not new. I know it's new. It may sound new to a lot of people, but since the occupation, or even before the occupation of our country, we have been oppressed. But I think maybe not to this level with the concentration camps, but it was always something that was ongoing. I think I can tell you a little bit about my my own story. So I was born in Turkestan, and however, I had to go to like a Chinese kindergarten and a Chinese elementary school. And even though I was Uyghur, I struggled to really understand my own identity as Uyghur because I barely spoke my language. I would speak Chinese when I was little, and we called people who are Uyghurs but speak Chinese 名考汉, so which means, you know, you're Uyghur, but you're more at ease with speaking Chinese and using Chinese on the daily. So this is, you know, through education like this, it's one of the ways that the Chinese government is suppressing our culture and our language. I know that there are a lot of Uyghur journals and Uyghur art groups and dance groups and whatever, and, you know, groups that try to preserve our history and our culture are destroyed. And this is done on purpose because the Chinese government wants a very homogenous society, because a homogenous society is easy to control. Uyghurs are very different, our culture and language, and because we're Turkic people, we're very different from the Chinese people, Chinese majority people. And the government is afraid of that because if you're different, then you're even more difficult to control. So, you know, it's really hard to preserve your culture, especially in Uzbekistan and even mainland China, even more in mainland China, because the government is systematically and actively destroying that culture while keeping just some bits of it to showcase to the world. For example, you may see on Instagram, oh, look, I visited, you know, they call Xinjiang, or the colonial name for our land. Look, I visited Xinjiang and look at these dancing Uyghurs. They're so happy. Look at them cooking. But it's really, you know, for display. It's not because they appreciate our culture, not because they want to preserve our culture, but because they want to show the outside world that we're doing fine and that, you know, there's nothing going on there. And this is really sad because a lot of people believe that, because information is so difficult to get out from China in general. So then when people see these videos and say, oh, look, your culture is like doing fine and you're doing fine, and it doesn't seem to be any genocide happening. The oppression has been there for 76, 75 years plus. The genocide has been happening since 2015, 2016. This is real. People are living this, and children in China now, a lot of them, they don't really speak Uyghur at all anymore, because they're not allowed to speak Uyghur at schools, and they have to learn English. And the Chinese government actively kind of brainwashes them. And sometimes I see videos circulating of these little Uyghur children wearing like very traditional Chinese or Confucius costumes, or get up and showcase like some sort of performance. And they don't even do this for like their own like Chinese population, but they do it to us because they want to erase our culture and really make our children think that you're Chinese, you're not Uyghur, you're Chinese. And this also affects the children that are outside of Uzbekistan as well, because when your culture is so harshly suppressed, it's very difficult to learn about it because all of the resources are destroyed. And the only way that you can learn about it is through your family. And sometimes immigrant parents are a little bit reluctant at teaching their children about their culture and their people, because when we think about our identity, we think about the oppression, we think about the genocide, which isn't a very positive thing. So a lot of parents are, reluctant to properly teach their children, and maybe even those parents themselves, they've been through that assimilation process, and maybe they don't even know so much about our culture and our history. So in Canada, I see a lot of Uyghur children and Uyghur youth kind of not knowing where they belong because they know that they're Uyghur, but what does that mean? And they don't always feel comfortable going to Uyghur gatherings and getting involved in our community. And all of that, so all of that has like a chain effect to our community and our culture and language.
And I'd love to hear your perspective as well too, as someone who grew up here. Can you speak to the importance of your immigrant identity and why it's important to you as a person, but then also keeping that Uyghur heritage alive?
For sure. So I think my Uyghur identity is a very, very big part of who I am as an individual. I think I mentioned a bit about before, but a lot of the work I do kind of stems from my identity as an Uyghur Muslim in Canada. And being an Uyghur Muslim, a lot of the work I do, so let's say in advocacy, it comes from, okay, well, I'm an Uyghur Muslim. My priority is, okay, I'm an Uyghur Muslim. My responsibility is, okay, I'm an Uyghur Muslim. So what is my role in what's happening right now? When it comes to heritage, like CUMSA mentioned, it's very, very important to hold tight to it, because what's happening right now is a cultural genocide where you're trying to wipe the culture away completely. And if I, as an Uyghur, can't hold on to it, then what's next, right? And so to me, it's very, very important to hold on to it, be it by learning the Uyghur language, by learning traditions, fabrics, food, and all that little fun stuff in between. In the end, is all really, really important. I think I've seen it a lot with my parents as well. They were born and raised in East Turkestan, and they escaped the genocide before I was born. And so to them, there is this pressure, well, yes, there is a genocide happening. How do I teach my children who we are as people without only teaching them the bad side, the genocide side, the side where my aunts and my cousins and my family are going through persecution? I think I should have mentioned in my opening statement, but just a couple of weeks ago, it feels like yesterday, my cousin was sent to jail for 7 years because he was in the room with his friends who watched the protest video of 2001, where there's a protest happening in East Turkestan. He watched that, he has a heart condition, and yet he was sentenced to 7 years in jail with no proper trial. He's not even my age. And so that is not something that's unique to one person. It's something that happens to majority of our Uyghur population. I would be surprised if you guys know anybody who doesn't know a family member, an Uyghur family member, who is not going through some kind of persecution. And so holding on to my heritage as an Uyghur is very, very important. And it's something that I don't think should just be for Uyghurs. As a community, we need to support our ummah, right? As Uyghurs, we support Palestinians, right? We support many different nations who are going through atrocities. And so Uyghur issue is not an Uyghur issue. It's a human issue. And we all really need to put in the work to be able to uphold the heritage and culture because it's not just one issue.
Lisa, you mentioned in your introduction that you were very instrumental in writing motion M62. First, if you could give an explanation of what that is to most folks and kind of your process in co-writing that motion, the challenges you faced and what you've kind of learned about the power of legislation. I think more and more recently, a lot of people are skeptical about the Canadian process and their involvement in advocacy as well too. So.
Definitely. First, I'd like to mention that Motion M62 was a very big team effort. It was thanks to Mr. Mehmet Tokhti and Khim Asimov from our Uyghur community, and also the Turkestan Association of Canada based in Toronto, as well as policymakers from the government, various MPs, very obviously, who was the sponsor of the motion, but also other MPs from other parties like Garnett and Alex Zip, and this is really important to mention because this isn't something that you can just do alone and just say, oh, you know what, I'm going to go into Parliament and we'll get something done. This takes a lot of time and effort. So Motion M62, essentially, how it started was that Mr. Mehmet Tokhti and Khim Asimov, they wanted to do some kind of resettlement project, but they were struggling because you need a lot of funding, you need a lot of resources, you need sometimes legislative power, which we don't have any of these. So they kind of put it in the back burner. And when I started working for MPs Berry, that's when I was able to kind of try to start taking up that project. And at first, it wasn't a motion. It wasn't really anything. It was just my colleagues and I in the office writing white papers and trying to get meetings with the then Minister of Immigration and GAC and try to explain the situation and why this kind of, I guess, resettlement or any kind of help for Uyghur refugees are needed. And this was done over the summer and I had to go back to school, but my ex-boss now, MP Zuberi, one day he just gives me a call and he says, do you want to come back to this office? I have a very important project I want to work on. And so he was telling me that he got picked to table either a bill or a motion in the House. And he said that he wanted to do it on Uyghurs, which I was very happy to hear about. So that's why I said yes, of course. And that's when we really started working on this specific motion. So this motion is different from a bill because bills are usually a change in legislation. So it's law. Once a bill is passed, it becomes law, whereas a motion is more of a, I guess, strong suggestion to the government. So they don't necessarily have to listen if they don't want to. So, why you might think, well, then why choose to do a motion instead of a bill? To us, I think what was happening in East Turkestan and was happening to Uyghur refugees, escaping East Turkestan and thinking that they found safety being deported back to East Turkestan. This was a very urgent issue to us, and a bill would have just taken way too much time and effort, and in the end, it might not have even passed. And because of the urgency of the matter, we said, you know what, we will do a motion, but we will really do our utmost best to get it passed. So that's when we had to rally support from all parties. You know, this wasn't a partisan issue. We had MPs from all parties supporting us, but we also rallied our Uyghur community to back us up. So we had pressure, you know, from the outside of parliament as well as inside of parliament. And obviously, you know, I'm not gonna get into the details about all the nitty-gritty and the details of the words and the text and the meetings with the with the cabinet members, but in the end, you know, through that team effort, we were able to pass this motion to resettle 10,000 Uyghurs living at risk in third countries to Canada.
And Kelsey, we touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear your perspective, Asma, on the importance of like community support. And Kelsey, you mentioned how you kind of have the external pressure of the Uyghur community also, but Asma, what ways do you think like non-Uyghurs can kind of educate themselves as well, and the most effective way for them to do that, and how they can help in preserving Uyghur culture, especially in like that education space?
For sure. I think something we're all seeing, especially with, you know, the MSA here at Carleton, is that community is very important. Once you find your people, you find the people to back you up, you could do much more. You'll be much more effective and efficient in whatever you do. And so with the bill, like Kelsey said, we were able to build a community support, right? Not just politicians, not just activists, but community members, teachers, family members, individuals who are able to rally support for a cause. And that's really where we saw the most change, right? It was with community. And so I'd say never, never underestimate the power of community, because community can definitely make the biggest impact. And as for building community and finding your community, really look at your priorities. Where are my priorities at? My Muslim community, I found my MSA. My Uyghur community, I found the Uyghur Center in Ottawa. We're able to work with them to be able to make efficient change. And so if you really look for it, you'll find it. It's all over the places, all over the place. There's leaders in all these communities who are looking for people who are seeking these communities. And so really just take the initiative, take a step up, talk to people around you and see if you can find your people, because then you'll make the most change. I think you asked me one more question.
Yeah, just how can they make sure Uyghur culture is preserved, especially in that education setting?
I think this is more for me, but it's something I would tell my siblings, is that don't be scared to talk about what you care about. Let's say a simple school presentation, maybe an assignment or a film that you're writing. Talk about the Uyghur issue. It's nothing to be scared of. It's not, you might get backlash, yes. You might get death threats, okay. Big deal, right? Really don't be scared and just talk, because your priorities are, yes, I want to make God happy. I want to make change. I want people to know about what's really happening. And so in the education space, I would say just speak up. I have a friend who made humongous change, raised awareness, and taught thousands of people about the Uyghur issue by just talking at school. She made conferences, ran campaigns, rallied her friends to protests, and that made huge change. And so really, really just step up and speak.
For both of you are very young and accomplished, mashallah. And Khoiser, can you tell us a little bit about firstly being the first Uyghur to work in Canadian Parliament, and what message would you give to all these young folks as well too, from those minority backgrounds that are interested in kind of entering that political space if they're trying to create change?
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's kind of funny because I would have never thought I would be involved in politics ever. I actually started my studies in natural sciences, so it's completely unrelated. I wanted to be a biologist because my mom is a scientist and a biologist, and I was also very interested. But when I started our activism, something just clicked, and I thought, you know what? this is the type of stuff that I want to do. I want to help people and I want to help my community. And people may think, well, okay, then, how did you get into parliament? Like, how does that work? I could never do that, or I don't have the experience. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to reach out to MPs. It doesn't have to start with, just going into parliament and making the biggest change. The way I started was with protests and writing letters to MPs and helping my mom's then organization translate things from English to French to reach out to MPs in Quebec as well. And the way I met Samir was actually at a protest. So, we worked, I was with International Support for Uyghurs back then, based in Montreal, and we had organized a protest about the Uyghurs. I believe it might have been about some kind of incident that happened in East Turkestan. There are a lot of them, so I don't remember which one, but we invited a couple of MPs, and that's where I met Samir, and we had a little bit of conversation, and then I started talking to his assistant, who then said, oh, are you interested in volunteering for us? So, it doesn't have to start with, having really extravagant degrees and so much experience. Obviously, it's good, but it's not impossible to gain experience while, advocating for your people. So just be confident, I would say. Reach out to the right people, because if you're reaching out to an MP that doesn't care about your issue, chances are they're going to forget about it and move on. But because Samir was very, he was in advocacy before he became MP. And he was very interested in our issue as well. We could make that connection, and I could tell him, can I volunteer for you? Can I help you? And then through conversations, you educate policymakers as well as the staff, because the staff is also very important. We may not see them, on the front, but really they do a lot of work in the back. So getting into parliament, educating staff, your colleagues, friends. It doesn't have to be something really serious. Could be just over lunch, or if a topic comes up, you just kind of talk about it a little bit, and then they will relay it to policymakers, and they will relay it to their boss, and that's how it there's a domino effect where things kind of grow. So I started at a protest. I meet Samir. I meet his assistant. He talks about volunteering for him. At the time, I couldn't volunteer, but I had enrolled a year later in their summer leadership program. Then, I was doing an internship, and slowly that's how it led to really creating like a friendship group, Uyghur friendship group in the parliament, and engaging more MPs, and passing M62. So yeah, I would say just don't be afraid to reach out. Even just start with your own MP. Tell them, hey, I'm in your writing and I'm your constituent, and I'd like to, talk to you about so and so issues. And if you have volunteer opportunities or internship opportunities, I'd love to work for you. It doesn't have to be really scary and complicated.
Collaboration is something that both of you mentioned about the importance of like reaching out to the right people, engaging with the right organizations that are kind of already doing this work. I want to talk to you, Esme, about your experience in collaborating. So you collaborated with several organizations for Uyghur advocacy specifically. How or what kind of advice did you give to youth who feel like I have no idea where to start? I don't know who to reach out to. And what benefits do you see with working in collaboration rather than like kind of going about it yourself?
I think I touched on that a bit beforehand, but I'll expand a bit more on it. For me, as an individual, I found the support that came from community to be the most motivating thing ever. It kind of pushes you out of your shell. I think there's some people in the audience who were sort of my mentors last year in the MSA at school, and they really pushed me through, kind of get through my bubble of being scared of. Yeah. About who I am as a Muslim, right? So being confident to go to school, maybe with a niqab or with an abaya. And similarly, it's really important to have that community to be able to go about advocacy, because advocacy could be very scary. You may get a couple of death threats, yes, but with the right community, I feel it is a motivator in many ways. It helps you fight through the challenges you'll face in your journey. And when it comes to finding the right community, I found it through really just, like Kausar said, going to events where these people would be, protests, handing out flyers. I would be, 10, 11 at ISNA handing out flyers during Jummah prayer. I could have asked that same question I asked earlier about how many people knew who Uyghurs were, and I would get maybe one or two hands, and that itself would surprise me. Right now, if I asked who Uyghurs were, I would get majority hands up. And that itself shows the power of advocacy and raising awareness. And so through handing out flyers, through going to protests, asking people to sign petitions, I found my people that helped me become who I am and what I do in advocacy. And so if you are looking towards finding your path in advocacy, just really go out there. Talk to MPs, talk to the people in your MSA who are working towards a similar goal, and you'll find your people there.
I will also, I was supposed to do this in the beginning, but if anyone has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. I do have a question left for each of you, and then we'll take questions from the audience as well, inshallah. So for Faisal, in your experience, how can Canadian youth leverage their position to advocate for immigrants and raise international awareness beyond Canada? And what specific campaigns or platforms would you suggest?
So one advantage that we have now is that the world is so connected through social media. And I think we should use that as our strength. Like Asma mentioned, collaborating and working with other communities is extremely important as well. Sometimes I go to, these cross-movement workshops and trainings, and I meet communities like Tibetan communities, Hong Kongers and Taiwanese, and we are all living oppression from CCP, but in different ways. And we get to exchange different ideas, learn about each other, and fight for each other's cause. And I think this is really good, because then you have a different perspective of how you can go about your advocacy. You have new ideas that you may not have thought about, because maybe you were just kind of in your own little bubble and your circle of activists and friends. So using social media and reaching out to different organizations from different communities that are also interested in your cause, or maybe that are not very interested, but you could make them interested. For example, when we talk about the Uyghur genocide, we don't talk so much about the climate impact, but you can relate these things. For example, a lot of the solar panels are from Turkestan, or built in China, or Turkestan, and it's using forced labor, Uyghur forced labor. And how are they making these panels is that they're burning coal. So they're actually burning more coal, so they're polluting more to create these solar panels. So, doesn't really make sense. But then you can say, hey, you know what? I will reach out to these environmental activists. And how about we tackle this issue together and talk about this? We can talk about, again, forced labor, fast fashion. There are a lot of other organizations that are really focused on this that you can reach out to. There are a lot of just little themes of in our oppression and in our genocide that we can use to collaborate with other organizations and other communities. And, via social media, this is very easy to do now. It's very easy to reach out and very easy to collab on things.
That point about it's not necessarily an oppression that's happening in a silo. And I think even like you mentioned, it's so intertwined with the climate
Mhm.
and climate change as well too. And I also noticed, especially people feel the need to kind of pick and choose which advocacy they get into and things like that. And it can at times feel overwhelming because there are all these different causes for people to mobilize, and it's so important as Muslims that we're mobilizing for everything. And I would love to hear actually both your perspectives on how you achieve that balance of your personal life and the advocacy that you do. Obviously, your advocacy is very tied to your livelihood, and that's also a very unique experience to be advocating for quite literally your life as well too. So I'd like to hear both your thoughts on how do you know?
Do you want me to start? Okay, I can start. Thank you. This is a very difficult question, and it's actually something that I still struggle with, is balancing my personal life, my mental health, and advocacy, as well as work and studies, and just kind of try to juggle and fit all of that into my calendar. Yes, it's very difficult. I would say just what helps me is that I try to take things one step at a time, one project at a time. Because if I think about, our cause and Uyghur genocide, it's very overwhelming because there are so many aspects to it. There's children's rights and women's rights and the environment, like I said, forced labor. There are so many aspects that it's hard to work on everything, right? So you have to choose one project or one theme that you would like to campaign for maybe a certain period of time, or maybe that's your main focus. And really just focus on that, because if you want to tackle everything, it's very overwhelming and very tiring, and it's also not effective. But if you do one campaign at a time or one issue at a time, it's a lot easier to manage. And also another tip is, when we first started hearing about the concentration camps and what was happening, I went from not being an activist at all and just kind of focusing on work and studies to really just completely being immersed. And that was also a time where there were a lot of news and articles and videos and stories about our genocide. And I just kept scrolling. I was doom scrolling on Facebook and Instagram, and I was just reading all about it. And I was crying all the time. I was hearing these stories, and at some point, it really affected my mental health. And so I decided to say, you know what, I will pick and choose what news articles I read or what information I'm taking in, because if not, it'll be very difficult for me to even go on my daily life, let alone do advocacy. So I would say sometimes you just need to distance yourself a little bit from the overwhelming amount of information, especially like negative news about what's happening. And think about your mental health. Take care of your mental health, because if you take care of yourself first, then you'll be able to help others. But if you're, crumbling down, then it'll be very difficult to help others as well.
Yeah, I think you touched upon that really nicely. I'll kind of reiterate what you said, but from a little different of a lens. For me, I could ramble on about self-improvement for hours, but something that really helped me improve myself as a person is time blocking. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Maybe it's now a cliche phrase, but time blocking has been something that has really helped me. really just take a step back and you assess what you're doing in your life. What am I involved in? What am I spending 2-3 hours on? How long am I scrolling? How long am I doing this? Just take a step back and reassess everything you're doing. And then look at your calendar. Okay, well, is my priorities shown in my calendar? If I showed somebody my calendar, can they tell me what my priorities are? And so once you kind of look at it from that lens, you'll be able to see what you're really focused on. And so once you identify your priorities, be it my advocacy, this, school, that, and then you put it into your calendar in the right way, you're able to kind of schedule everything in a way where you're able to objectively see what it is that you're doing. And like Kelsey mentioned, it's really important to take care of your mental health. Take a step back, reassess everything, and really say, look, if I'm not taking care of myself, if I don't take care of myself, and I can't help anybody else, right? And so if you're able to take care of yourself, your mental health, you put yourself in this best position to be able to make the most impact. And that's what's important. Right now, we're all building this foundation for ourselves to be able to help the most people, be making the most money, being maybe an influencer with 2 million followers, a soccer player who has a huge following. All that kind of builds a foundation for yourself to be able to make the most effective and efficient impact. So definitely.
Thank you both for your responses. Do you have any questions from the audience? Yeah.
What do you expect Canada, like the government to do? And like what are they doing right now? What's kind of the future plan?
Yes, so one of the projects, program is the 62 program that I mentioned to resettle 10,000 Uyghurs to Canada. And it may not seem like a lot compared to maybe other groups, but if we compare it to the number of Uyghurs that we have in Canada, which are approximately, I think, 2,500, maybe a little more, it is a big number for us. So that is a very positive impact. The recognition of the genocide, even in Parliament, it was recognized unanimously by all members from all parties. And this is important because you need to recognize something to be able to talk about it and deal with it, right? So I think something else that is related to forced labor is Bill S-211. However, there are a lot of, I guess, critiques about Bill S-211, but you know, it's better than nothing. But it's still something that we're working on. Forced labor is really a big issue. The US has a legislation called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that we wish to implement in Canada as well. But there are also a lot of things that maybe we're lacking in. For example, you know, we've only sanctioned, I think, 2 or 3 officials as well as one entity that are involved in the genocide. I think we should be doing a lot more because we already have the resources to know that certain individuals and certain groups are involved in our genocide. So I don't think it's that difficult to sanction them. Regarding forced labor, definitely improve the bill that we already have. Solar panels also, you know, climate change is such an important topic in Canada. And I don't think that the involvement of Uyghur forced labor in that topic is mentioned very often. And I think it's really important. You know, we want to collaborate with China on climate change, but China is the #1 polluter in the whole world. And we're claiming that they're the lead of, you know, climate change, which just doesn't make sense to me at all. Why do we need to collaborate with, first of all, a country that's a dictatorship, that's polluting more than anybody else, that is using forced labor to sell these solar panels and whatnot, EVs, EV cars to democratic countries like Canada. I think these are issues that we're able to tackle, and these are issues that Canadians care about as well. So definitely things that we can do in the Canadian legislation. I don't know if you have anything to say.
I think I could touch up on this a bit. Many of us have our families back home, right? A lot of us are refugees. A lot of us, even if we're born and raised, we have family back home. And when your family's back home, they are at risk. And so very easily can they say, oh, well, look, your sister abroad is fighting against this. You're going to go to concentration camps, so she stops talking. And so that kind of pressure, that family pressure, right? That your people is at risk because you're talking or you're speaking out loud or you're advocating is something that I don't think many people realize is really, really painful. Saying you can't talk because your family is going to die if you do. And that itself is very, very strong of a pressure.
Yeah, adding to that, there are a lot of Uyghurs who were somehow able to escape Turkestan and China. And so they go to countries that aren't like Canada, where they don't just, randomly deport people. Because there are a lot of countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkey, more or less, it depends kind of. Morocco even, there are cases of Uyghurs, escaping to those countries, but then the government just detains them and say, no, you know what, we'll just send you back. Because probably economic pressure from China, political pressure as well. And they want to have that good relationship with China. So then Uyghurs who are escaping to these countries are paying the price of that. So because we wanted to protect these people, and because it's extremely difficult to directly help the people in Turkestan because we don't have access to the country, China doesn't let anybody in freely, it's really hard to help them directly. So a way that we thought we could tackle on this issue is to at least help the people that were able to escape, that are maybe don't have a status or are at risk of deportation, and are getting threats from the government, the Chinese government, as well as pressure from the government, the country that they've escaped to deport them back. So these are real risks that a lot of Uyghurs are facing. And when they're being deported back, you don't know what's going to happen to them. They could be sent to jail. They could be sent to concentration camp. They could die right away, right there. We don't really know. So that's why we're talking about vulnerable Uyghurs in third countries.
We have many friends like from the audience ourselves probably have like many friends that don't want to get into advocacy, but that or like so I was wondering how to kind of that
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, when I also started advocacy, I felt a lot of despair because I felt like we're not being heard. Nobody cares. Nobody even knows about us and what's happening. But I think it's really important to just be perseverant and patient, but also reach out to the right people. There are groups that have been doing advocacy for a very long time. Reach out to them because they're going to have tips. and they're gonna know strategies on how to, for example, talk to policymakers and make change. Also, like mentioned before, collaboration with other communities and allies. Our allies are so important for our community because there's only so many of us. We're a very small community, and a big portion are not into advocacy because they're afraid of persecution for their families back home. So they kind of stay behind. So there's only, a few of us doing this. So we need our allies. We need support. That's why we do a lot of outreach. And that's why I'm really grateful for this kind of panel, because I get to talk to people that are potentially interested in helping out, or I get to learn about others from their perspective, from their point of view on their issue, and get ideas for our issue as well. So I think really perseverance, being patient, and reaching out to the right people, collaborating, those are really important.
I'll also add on a bit to that. I would say tell your friend that we in Canada have so many privileges that people all over the world can't imagine. We have this kind of voice which people are dying to have. And so really the most important thing is that to use that voice, right? Be that voice for the voiceless. It's a very cliche phrase, but if you really think about it, it's true. You have this voice, which means you have this kind of responsibility where you need to speak up, right? Not just as who you are as a person, but you are a human. You are a Muslim, right? And so with that comes responsibilities. Having that voice comes with responsibilities, and that responsibility is being a voice for the voiceless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of the Uyghurs that escaped, obviously, they do it illegally. They don't have a choice. We hear stories about people like crossing mountains and going, through different brokers and whatnot, and really just risking their lives to escape. Or there are a very very small amount of people that the Chinese government does let out. And this is a strategy actually by the CCP, because they're showing you, just like they're showing you those dancing Uyghurs, they're showing you, hey, look, they're able to travel freely. They're able to get their passport. They're able to do whatever they want. This isn't true. But most Uyghurs, including my family, they're not able to get their passport. They're not able to travel freely. They're not able to get out of there. So it's really important to understand that even though, yes, there are people who are able to, the majority aren't. And the people that are able to get out, they're also at risk. If they come out here, they're probably being told before they leave, don't talk about anything, don't do anything. Just, for example, if they're international students, for example, just study and that's it. Don't do anything, don't get involved, don't talk, because if you do, something's going to happen to your family. So it's under these circumstances that, they're able to get out of there. There are also a lot of Uyghurs who were able to escape when things weren't as bad as it is now. Even though it's really sometimes case by case, because sometimes you're able to get your passport, sometimes you aren't, because it's not a country where rule of law is really abided by. It just depends, but there were people that were able to get out before the concentration camps that are still at risk because they weren't able to get papers, for example, in their host country, or or they escaped, like I said, through mountains and very risky ways. So yeah, just we have to be careful about kind of what we see, especially like these days. I see on Instagram, for example, a lot of people saying, "Oh, listen, like I'm traveling to Xinjiang and I'm seeing this one mosque that they show in every single video, and look, they're able to practice their religion, and look at these Uyghurs dancing in the streets." First of all, dancing is not the only thing we do. But, it's clearly propaganda, but a lot of people, because they don't know about what's happening, they buy into this, right? And then they think, oh, okay, maybe they're fine actually. And maybe it is US propaganda, as the CCP would say, or, so it's really important to educate yourself on the issue and look at different sources and resources, and also kind of use your own logic to see, does this make sense? If I'm seeing the same mosque and that same little grandpa in every single video telling me how great life is in Xinjiang or is Turkestan, you can feel that something is off. So yeah, just be careful about the disinformation, misinformation that's out there. I don't know if you have something to add. There are a lot of Uyghur NGOs out there, Uyghur Human Rights Project. I'm part of World Uyghur Congress. In Ottawa, there's the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. There's a lot of them that you can reach out to. And I know that people, they want to, cross-reference some of the information. Amnesty International, they also have things out there, articles on Uyghurs and people working on the Uyghur issue. Human Rights Watch, even reach out to other communities that are under the CCP oppression, like the Hong Kong community and Tibetan community, because they'll also tell you, that things are not so great as the Chinese government claims. So yeah, it's very difficult to not be a victim of the disinformation campaign by Chinese government, because they allocate a very, very big amount of resources and money and time and people to just focus and do this work, right? Whereas activists like us, there's only so much we can tackle and there's only so much we can do. And there's just so many issues that we have to tackle that it's difficult for us to always be, on social media, like telling you, oh, this is false and this is true. But I would say definitely reach out to these Uyghur organizations as well as international human rights organizations to check, is this information correct or is it propaganda?
Oh,
okay.
Okay, we'll do the two and then we'll do IU's question as well. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I would say that I don't use the term cultural genocide because I think it diminishes a little bit, well, actually not a little bit, a lot of what's happening to our people. When people think about cultural genocide, they just think, okay, so it's just like their culture that's being erased. But no, it's really our people. They're being sent to concentration camps. They're being sent to forced labor camps. They're being used as an organ, as like forced organ donors. Forced labor. I mean, they're sterilizing our women. They're separating the children from their families. That's not just cultural, you know? And it's also important to understand that it's not just our culture that the government is after. The government's after our land because it's full of resources, and geographically, it borders a lot of Central Asian countries. So it's a very strategic, you know, area for their Belt and Road Initiative. So I personally just use the word genocide. I don't really add cultural, but there is, you know, the cultural aspect to it as well as the other. I don't know if you want to add something.
No, I think I think Kelsar is more of a politician than I am, so she's more strategic about her terms. When I say cultural genocide, like she said, it's more about understanding that there is culture within it, right? They are trying to remove the culture, but that, like she said, it is just an aspect. It's not just the culture. It's the people, it's the tradition, it's the land. It's really everything about Uyghurs, including their religion. And so, yes, cultural genocide is just a term we use, but it is a genocide. Yeah, for sure. So the Ottawa Uyghur Center is a center in Orleans. There's an Islamic school attached to it. The Uyghur Center's main mission is to really raise awareness about what's happening and become like a hub for individuals to come to really be who they are without having to be scared about saying, I am Uyghur. I think there's a lot of people who are scared to say they're Uyghur because there's a huge Chinese presence in our schools as well. And I know personally that there are many people who don't want to talk about it because they're scared of the backlash. And so the Ottawa Uyghur Center is an amazing place just to be who we really are, to learn about advocacy, to learn about what's really happening from people who've experienced it. A lot of the Uyghur population in Ottawa goes to Ottawa Uyghur Center. So if you're looking for a place to talk to individuals, really to know what's happening to them and their family on a personal level, it's definitely the place to be. My role in the Ottawa Uyghur Center is mainly with children. I work as an event organizer, so just coordinating events, prawn contests, and yeah, festivals.
Thank you so much to Cloister and Esma for educating us all. I know we're all better for it, and I hope everyone is feeling a bit more inspired on how to get involved, inshallah. We will have like a 5-minute break after, and then we'll do a little advocacy cycle to see how we can actually get involved right away, inshallah. And then we'll wrap up the event, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair to Cloister and Esma for
Thank you.
I think the MSA provided stuff. So thank you. Beautiful.
So much for organizing.
So loud.
Thank you.
And then just let me know whatever your level of comfort is. If you have people that want to use All right, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Huh? I think it's on. Can you hear me? Yeah? Oh, I should turn it off? All right. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We're gonna just get started so we don't keep you too long on a fine Saturday, inshallah. All right, so it was incredible to hear the experiences of Esma and Khoiser, and we learned a lot. And basically, I'm gonna take you guys through a day in the life of advocacy officer at Justice for All and the kind of cases that we see and how that kind of informs our advocacy. So if you guys are ever interested in doing this yourselves outside of Justice for All, or just in general, if you basically can see a problem, how do you take the next steps to solving that problem? So I'm going to need a brave volunteer to be our reader. Can you guys see it? It's being blocked. Okay. I guess I can read. Yeah? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Do you need a mic or you're good? Thank you for reading that out. So this is today's case study that we are all going to be working on advocating for. So all of our case studies that we have at Justice for All are based on real life occurrences of what we hear. And we basically see a case study and we have to figure out as a team what our course of action will be in advocating against it, usually. So with that in mind, there are central questions that we have to ask ourselves first. And I would like to get everyone's perspectives on this. So firstly, what challenges this may face in her daily life as a Uyghur teen living in East Turkestan? Based on that case study, what are 3 core things you can see as human rights violations right off the get-go? Yes. The re-education. Thank you. Anything else? Yep. Constant surveillance. And lack of religious freedom. Okay. There's definitely more, but we'll start with these 3. No worries. Everyone's staring at you as writing. No pressure. So we have chosen her father being taken away, constant surveillance, and religious freedom. And how does the Chinese government's treatment of Uyghurs, how is this affecting her family and her community? Yeah. Okay, constant fear. Anything else? Yeah. Okay, there we go. Subversion of economic or financial pressure is now on someone else. Yes, sorry. I don't know why, I'm just kind of pointing at that area. Okay, mosque being demolished and the restricted movement. Okay. Now, as people in Canada, that we are able to advocate for things not just in Canada, what would you say, just off the get-go, to address this? If, yeah. Okay, very good. So first thing you would do is share her story. Okay, how? Speak up. Okay, how? Social media, okay. Anything else? Yes? Mhm. I think that's it's on a case by case basis. So that's something that when you are in charge of kind of advocating for someone else, it's up to them alone if they would rather it be anonymous or if you share their story. It reaches a point, especially when in our work we meet with MPs, that level of anonymity might have to go away, but that's something we communicate and share. Okay, how does this make you feel? Okay, what does May's experiences make you feel? And it's very important you know how these things make you feel, because when you're talking to your MPs, they don't know May. They know you as the person that is sharing May's story. So they care about you because you're a Canadian, and they care about your feelings because you're a Canadian, or you're here and you're able to advocate. So in hearing this story, what does that make you feel? Yes. Okay, angry? Angry? How else do you feel? Okay, so she no longer learns the Uyghur language. You're someone that speaks your language. How does the fact that she can't speak her language make you feel? Angry? What else? Restricted? Okay, we're able to fast, we're able to pray. Oh, sorry, yeah. Worried? Worried, yes. Very worried. Imagine if any of these things were to happen in Ottawa today. Tomorrow, the federal government is like, no more Ramadan, no more praying. What feelings would be evoked? Okay, so we have fear, angry, worried. Okay, okay. Now, in analyzing these challenges, you have to come at it from a human rights perspective. Does anyone know why we emphasize only a human rights perspective? We don't, in our work, we tend not to look at things from a trade perspective, from like the alliance type perspective. There are organizations that do that in terms of like those, but we focus on human rights. Do you know why specifically in Canada it makes the most sense to go for human rights? Yeah. It's universal for sure. Yes. Think of it also, yeah. Yes. So I always like to say, how does Canada describe itself? Diverse. What's that word that starts with M? Multicultural. Canada is a place that accepts multiculturalism. And what's happening to May's family is actively going against that. It's going against the quote unquote Canadian value. That is kind of our buy-in when you're trying to talking to MPs, when you're talking to government officials as to what is going on. Okay? So you don't have to be an expert in Canadian law, but in what you've seen, what do you think the Canadian government can do? Yeah. Sanctions, yes. What else could they do? Voicer talked about this a lot on her panel of the different, yeah. Sorry? Acknowledge it, yeah. Offer refuge, yeah. Think about these things that are affecting the community and the things that are being taken away as well. What can Canada do to help that? Yeah. Stop trade, yes. Yeah. Bring it up to the world level, yes. In what way could that look like? UN? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly, exactly. So we saw with the Palestine case, the country that took them to court wasn't Palestine, it was South Africa, right? So there are opportunities for other countries to kind of be that voice for the people that are currently undergoing oppression. So if a country was to go to the ICJ on behalf of the Uyghur community as well too, is something that is feasible. You had your hand up? Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a really good one. So pressure on organizations that benefit from forced labor. This is a huge one that I think Esna and Chris are both touched on. The fast fashion industry is something that Canada cares a lot about because of its environmental impact. Okay. You also have to get them to look at it from the forced labor impact as well too. So I think you guys mentioned some of these. So someone mentioned provide a safe haven for Uyghur refugees. Demand educational equity. We saw that in her school, she was slowly being unable to speak in her language. She was forced to learn another language. In Canada, we're placing more and more emphasis in the fact that French people should be able to speak French, or we always say express yourself in a language of your choosing. It's much easier to think about what can I say to the Canadian government when you think about the rights that you're afforded here in Canada as well too. Yep. I think that is a really great point. So Canada is a huge funder of international development projects and things like that, especially when it's centered on human rights. So I really like very real life example of the fact that there's no funding to maintain the Uyghur language in Canada. So if you were thinking about what your demand would be, you'd be like, everybody has the right to know their language. Everybody has the right to be able to maintain their language. And that could translate into asking for more funding when you're meeting with the ministers. Does anybody know which minister perhaps that would fall under? Education. Okay, what else? Heritage. Mhm. Yes, 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 yes. So that would be a great one. Minister Kamal, correct? Yes. So now that we kind of have these ideas and we know the key challenges, you need to translate that into key demands. So this is where we're going to end off for the day, where we need to brainstorm based on all these ideas, all the things that you're taking into consideration, three clear demands. And I would say the most effective things about demands is you know what your problem is, you have a proposed solution, and you know directly who you want to speak to about it. Okay? So with all these things, does anyone want to try and formulate what our first demand would be for May's family? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So I really like the fact that he brought up a motion that already exists. So a lot of the things with your demands is you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. You can talk about motions M62 where there has been a promise made or an indication that something will be done. And your demand is we just want to see that come into fruition. We want to put pressure on the Canadian government to make that happen. So correct me if I'm wrong, Quasar, but that if you based on what I understand, it would be there's lag right now and we're waiting for the immigration office. So we could kind of direct that to the Minister of Immigration. And this is your demand and you're getting people to sign on these petitions and we're flooding the emails of that ministerial office, for example. Yes. exactly, 100%. Any other ideas? Just the resettlement of 10,000 refugees. Just put a question on that. What would you do in terms of the fact that they haven't heard from her father? What could a demand be there? Yeah. Okay. So you're talking to a Canadian MP and you're advocating for whereabouts, someone that's not a Canadian. How do you kind of formulate that to get them to kind of try and care about it? You're basically trying to do my job right now. Like, it's very hard to reformulate but that's the nature of these things. You're trying to get the Canadian government to have buy-in for something like this. And then the fact that the mosque has been demolished. What kind of demand could you potentially create for that? Good question. Yes. Yes, demanding religious freedom, especially when you're talking about the big institutional stage of like what governs us, and under international human rights, religious persecution is illegal. So having that kind of to fall back on, where it's all of your demands have to have a basis as to why they're wrong. Right? Yeah. That's a good question. For the nature of our work, most of our demands are to government officials, not necessarily to organizations. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So that would, that's not wrong. That's not wrong, I will say. That's not necessarily the demand to get your foot in the door, but that would be something that once you have those meetings, you can kind of bring up and discuss. Because your demand is essentially, I need to meet with you to discuss further and kind of catch their eye as to why they should also care about something like this. Yeah. Yes, freedom to expression. So that is kind of a mini overview. Oh, yes. Excellent. Yes. Mhm. And that is, I think, even one of like the strongest points is the fact that there are 2,500 Uyghurs already here, and they still have family back home. And that in and of itself is enough for the Canadian government to care about their well-being. Questions I can answer? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So for resettlement of refugees, I would reach out to the Minister of Immigration and refugees. I don't remember his full title, but it falls under that. And the way we do is that we do target the ministerial offices, but then there's various MPs and there's various like different parliamentary groups, for example. So there's the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Human Rights, and that has like a bunch of different MPs, not necessarily just ministers. So I think Khoiser also mentioned like there's an Uyghur Parliamentary Friendship Group, things like that. So I would recommend looking into the House of Commons because it's not just ministers that fall under specific things. There could be a bunch of different MPs that it's like a group that they're part of, or they've taken it on because like someone in their constituency has brought it up. So you really have to kind of do your research a little bit there. Yeah. Mhm. I would personally reach out to Minister of Foreign Affairs. So we have, I know Justice for All has a very specific case of, I don't know if everyone remembers when Brother Mansour Schumann, he disappeared for a couple of weeks. And it was the Minister of Foreign Affairs that we were in contact with throughout that whole process. And she was the one that I think she eventually ended up putting out a statement that the Canadian government is also worried about his whereabouts. That was a significantly more pressing matter, and felt that she felt urgency given the fact that so many people were already bringing it up, and a lot of people had already done press conferences to the fact that he was missing. So that's who I would, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, what minister would you recommend? Both ministers, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions about this? It's obviously not as simple as we kind of just dissected now. A lot of the work that we do it in consultation with the actual group that we're advocating for. So our first step would be talking to members of the Uyghur community as well too, and the organizations to get their perspectives and their feedback. Ideally, for organizations like Justice for All, we're not speaking for the community, we're speaking on behalf of the community, given our resources as well too. So I think within advocacy, it's very important to center your own privilege and your own, and not kind of take it up on like, this is me, like, this is what I think we should do. It's very much still recognizing the privileges that you hold within that space. That's it for me, and Jazakallah khair everyone for coming, and please thank you so much to Khoiser and Asma as well too for the lovely panel. Yeah, if you would like to get involved in JFA in any way, please let me know, or join the group chat that we mentioned as well too. Okay.